I found out the truth on a quiet night in a hotel room, hours away from home, when a single message changed the direction of my life. It was supposed to be a normal work trip, a short conference meant to help my business grow, but instead it became the moment where everything I believed about my family began to collapse. What I heard that night was not a misunderstanding or a private complaint. It was a clear picture of how I was seen by the person I had spent years protecting, supporting, and putting before myself. I was sitting on the edge of the bed when my phone buzzed. The message came from my cousin, short and hesitant, telling me to watch a video and saying she was sorry. I almost ignored it. Family drama had a way of appearing when I was finally away and I was tired. Still, I tapped the link. The screen loaded slowly, then opened to a familiar scene. My family's dining table, the same room where we gathered every Sunday. My mother sat at the center, a glass in her hand, relaxed, confident, unaware she was being recorded. Her voice filled the room before I even processed what I was seeing. She was talking about me. She laughed lightly as she spoke, surrounded by relatives who listened without interrupting. She described me as someone who failed at her original plans, someone who gave up, someone who was pretending to be successful while doing work that meant nothing. She spoke as if she was amused by the idea of my life, as if everything I had done was a joke. I heard her call me weak. I heard her say I did not have what it takes. I heard her dismiss the work that paid for her comfort, her care, and her survival. I sat completely still as the video continued. My cousin's camera angle was low, hidden, capturing every word clearly. No one stopped my mother. No one corrected her. A few people smiled. Someone laughed quietly. It was not a fight or an argument. It was casual, confident humiliation. What none of them knew was that while they sat there judging my choices, I was the one paying for the medications that kept my mother functioning. I was the one handling her insurance, arguing with providers, and covering costs that had emptied my savings more than once. I had built my career around flexibility so I could take her to appointments and manage her care. I had stepped away from my original education because she needed help, and I told myself it was temporary. The video ended after a minute, but I stayed staring at the dark screen long after. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my cousin, apologizing, asking if she should delete it. I typed back slowly and told her to leave it exactly where it was. Then I told her I would see her when I returned. That night I did not sleep. I replayed the words again and again, not because they hurt, but because they explained everything I had been refusing to see. By morning, the shock had settled into something colder and clearer. I packed my things, checked out early, and started the drive home with one thought repeating in my mind. This was not a misunderstanding. This was the truth, and I was finally ready to face it. The drive back felt longer than it was, not because of traffic or distance, but because my mind kept returning to the same moment from the video. My mother's voice was calm and sure, as if she was stating facts everyone already agreed on. By the time I reached home, I knew I could not pretend anymore. Whatever I did next had to be deliberate. I could not react emotionally. I needed control. I did not go to my mother's house. Instead, I stopped at my own place and opened the cabinet where I kept my documents. Over the years, I had developed a habit of saving everything. Bills, receipts, insurance letters, bank statements. At first it was for taxes. Later it became necessary because her medical expenses were complicated and often questioned. I pulled out the folder and placed it on the table. It was thick, heavier than it looked. I sat down and began flipping through it slowly. Each page was familiar: monthly insurance premiums, medication costs that increased without warning, specialist visits not fully covered, emergency payments made late at night when a pharmacy refused to release a prescription without upfront cash. There were notes written in my handwriting, reminders to call providers, follow up on claims, appeal denials. This was not help given once or twice. This was years of sustained responsibility. I realized something important as I reviewed the records. No one else had ever asked how these things were handled. No one had ever offered to help. The family dinner table conversations were always about appearances, about who was doing well and who was falling behind. The real work happened quietly, and I had allowed it to stay that way. My phone buzzed again, a message from my cousin asking if I was okay. I replied that I was fine and asked her to meet me the next day. I did not explain why. There were things that needed to be shown, not discussed. That evening, my mother called me. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Then she called again. A third time, I did not answer. For the first time in years, I let it ring without feeling panic. The silence felt strange, but it also felt intentional. Later that night, I opened my laptop and checked something I had not looked at in months, an acceptance email. It was still there, unread but not forgotten. I closed the laptop without opening it fully. That decision would come later. Before going to bed, I placed the folder back into the cabinet, but I did not push it all the way in. I wanted it within reach. Something was coming. I did not know exactly how it would unfold, but I knew this much. The version of me that absorbed everything quietly was no longer in control of the situation. The next morning, I met my cousin at a small cafe near her place. I did not waste time with small talk. I placed the folder on the table between us and opened it. She stopped speaking the moment she saw what was inside. I told her everything, slowly and clearly. I explained how it started years ago, when my mother first got sick and called me late one night, frightened and unsure about how she would manage. I explained how I had been in the middle of my own plans back then, halfway through a different future, one I had worked hard to reach. I explained how I told myself stepping away would be temporary, just until things stabilized. My cousin listened without interrupting as I showed her the numbers. She saw the payments, the dates, the gaps where my savings dropped suddenly, the months where my income barely covered everything. When she reached the last page, she looked up at me differently. Not with pity, but with disbelief. She asked me why I never told anyone. I answered honestly. At first, I thought it was my responsibility. Later, I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, things would improve. I believed effort would eventually be recognized. I believed loyalty mattered. She told me the video was still online, that people had already commented. Some agreed with my mother, some mocked me, some asked questions. I felt no rush of anger. What I felt was focus. When I left the cafe, I did not go home. I went straight to my bank. I sat in a quiet office and reviewed my accounts carefully. There was an automatic payment scheduled for the end of the month, one I had set up without thinking years ago. I asked for it to be paused. The employee confirmed it calmly, as if it were a normal request. That was when I understood how much power I had been giving away without question. That afternoon, my mother texted again. She asked why I missed her appointment. She said the office was confused. She said the pharmacy was delaying her refill. I did not reply. I read the messages once and locked my phone. That night, I opened my laptop again, and this time I read the acceptance email completely. The program start date, the conditions, the deadline to confirm. I did not make a decision yet, but I did not close the window either. Before sleeping, I wrote a list. Not of feelings, not of complaints, just actions, accounts to separate, calls to make, documents to send, conversations to avoid. It was not revenge, it was preparation. Somewhere between the first and last item, I understood something that changed everything. My mother did not see me as unreliable by accident. She saw me as permanent. And the only way to end that role was to step out of it completely. I spent the next 2 days moving carefully, saying nothing while setting things in motion. Every action was quiet, deliberate, and documented. I did not announce changes. I did not argue. I let my mother believe the delay was temporary, the kind that always resolved itself because it always had before. On the third day, I made the first call that mattered. I contacted the insurance provider and asked a direct question about my role on the account. The representative explained it clearly. I was listed as the guarantor. As long as my name remained there, I was legally responsible for everything. I thanked her and asked what steps were required to remove myself. She hesitated briefly, then explained the process and the timeline. When I hung up, my phone vibrated again. Another message from my mother. This time her tone was sharper. She said the pharmacy refused to release her medication. She asked what I had done. I did not respond. Instead, I printed the forms I had just received and placed them next to the folder. I signed where required, but did not submit them yet. Timing mattered. I needed everything aligned before the situation became public. That evening, my cousin sent me screenshots. Family group chats were active. People were talking about the video. Some defended my mother. Some said she was just stressed. A few said I should be more grateful. No one asked me directly what was true. I noticed that pattern immediately. I drafted an email but did not send it. It was brief and factual. No explanations, no emotional language, just dates, numbers, and statements of responsibility. I read it twice and saved it as a draft. The next morning, my mother called repeatedly. When I did not answer, she left a voicemail. Her voice was irritated but controlled. She said we needed to talk. She said she did not understand what was going on. She said I was being dramatic. I deleted the message. By the afternoon, I submitted the paperwork. The confirmation email arrived within minutes. It stated clearly that my responsibility would end at the close of the billing cycle. Nothing else. No warnings, no guilt. That night, I finally replied to my mother with a single sentence. I told her I was unavailable and that she would receive official information soon. She responded immediately, demanding an explanation. I did not answer again. I slept without interruption, for the first time in months. The next day, I sent the email to the family. I attached the spreadsheet. I did not accuse anyone. I did not mention the video. I stated only what I had done and what I would no longer do. I pressed send and turned my phone off. When I turned it back on hours later, the messages had already begun. Questions, anger, confusion, accusations. I read none of them carefully. I already knew what was coming next. The silence I had maintained was about to break, and when it did, there would be no way to reverse what I had started. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes of sending the email, my phone began filling with notifications. Calls I did not answer. Messages I did not open. I could see names flashing across the screen, relatives who had not checked on me in years suddenly demanding explanations. I left the phone face down and focused on what mattered next. By the evening, my mother arrived at my door. She did not knock at first. She rang the bell repeatedly, then began knocking hard enough that it echoed through the apartment. I stood on the other side of the door and listened. Her voice shifted quickly from anger to confusion, then to accusation. She asked what I thought I was doing. She said I was embarrassing her. She said the family was talking. I did not open the door. She tried calling me while standing outside, as if that would force me to respond. When that failed, she raised her voice, asking if I was really going to hide instead of explaining myself. I waited until the noise stopped and her footsteps faded before moving again. Later that night, a message finally came through that caught my attention. It was from my cousin. She told me my mother was panicking. The insurance company had contacted her. Appointments were being questioned. Payments were no longer going through. For the first time, things were not resolving quietly. The next morning, I received a formal email from the insurance provider confirming the changes. The language was clear and final. My involvement had ended. Any future responsibility would fall elsewhere. I forwarded the message to my personal archive and closed it. Around noon, my mother sent a long message. She said she was confused and hurt. She said she never meant what she said at the dinner. She said everyone complains sometimes. She said family does not do this to each other. She did not apologize. She did not deny the video. She framed everything as my overreaction. I did not reply. Instead, I checked my bank account. The funds that usually disappeared every month were untouched. Seeing the balance felt unreal. I transferred a portion into a separate savings account and labeled it clearly. That transfer was small, but it marked something irreversible. That afternoon, the family messages shifted in tone. Some people asked for clarification. Some asked my mother questions she could not answer. A few reached out privately, careful with their words, trying to understand how long things had been this way. By evening, my cousin sent me one more message. She said my mother was telling a new version of the story now. She said I was unstable. She said I was overwhelmed by work. She said I was making impulsive decisions. I read that message twice. Then I opened the folder again and added one more file to it, the video. I saved it in more than one place. I did not plan to use it yet. I did not need to. But the balance of control had shifted, and my mother knew it. 2 days passed without direct contact. That silence did not mean calm, it meant pressure was building elsewhere. I found out through my cousin that my mother had started calling relatives one by one. She was asking for help, but not with money at first. She asked for sympathy. She said she did not understand why I was acting this way. She said I was cold. She said I had changed. She did not mention the years of support. She did not mention the records. She did not mention the video. By the third day, the story shifted again. This time, she asked for money. One aunt declined and suggested she speak to me. Another said she could help temporarily but needed details. My mother gave none. She said it was private. She said I was exaggerating numbers. She said I had always been dramatic. That afternoon, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered without speaking. A man introduced himself as an administrator from a medical office. He asked if I was still responsible for my mother's account. I told him no. He paused, then asked if I could confirm her medical history anyway. I said I could not. He thanked me and ended the call. Minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Her tone was different now. Not angry, not accusing, controlled. She said we needed to talk privately. She said misunderstandings happen. She said the family did not need to be involved. I did not delete the message. I saved it. That evening, I sent one more email. This one went only to my mother. It was brief. I told her I would no longer manage her care or finances. I told her all future communication should be directed elsewhere. I told her I wished her well. She replied within minutes. Her message was long. She said I was abandoning her. She said I owed her for raising me. She said she sacrificed everything. She said I was selfish. She said she would never have spoken that way if she knew she was being recorded. She said the recording was the real betrayal. I read the message carefully, then I noticed what she never said. She did not deny the words. She did not apologize for them. She was only angry they were exposed. I did not respond. The next morning, my cousin called me. She sounded nervous. She said my mother was planning to come see me again, this time with someone else. She did not know who. She said my mother believed she could still fix this if she confronted me directly. I thanked her for the warning. That afternoon, I confirmed something I had been avoiding. I opened the acceptance email again and clicked the confirmation link. The screen refreshed, and a simple message appeared stating my place was secured. I closed the laptop and sat still for a long moment. Whatever happened next, I would not be stepping back. The confrontation came sooner than expected. I was returning from a short meeting when I saw them waiting near my car. My mother stood beside my aunt, her posture rigid, her expression already set. There was no surprise on her face when she saw me. She had come prepared for this moment. She spoke first, loudly enough to make sure I could not walk past without acknowledging her. She said we needed to talk and that running away was not an option anymore. My aunt stepped closer and said this situation had gone too far, that the family was concerned, that things were being misunderstood. I told them I had nothing to discuss. My mother reacted immediately. She said I was punishing her. She said I was trying to control her by cutting support without warning. She said I knew how fragile her situation was and that I was choosing to hurt her anyway. She said the family deserved an explanation. I asked her a single question. I asked if she denied what she said at the dinner. She did not answer directly. She said everyone complains sometimes. She said it was a private moment. She said recording it was wrong. She said I was focusing on the wrong thing. That was enough. I told her calmly that everything had already been explained. I told her the records were sent. I told her the arrangements were final. I told her I would not reverse them. My aunt looked confused. She said she had seen the spreadsheet but did not understand how the numbers could be so high. She said it seemed excessive. She asked if I had exaggerated. I opened my phone and showed her the original statements. Dates, providers, amounts, transfers, no commentary, just facts. She went quiet. My mother noticed the shift immediately. She interrupted, saying those numbers did not tell the full story. She said I had chosen to spend that money. She said no one forced me. She said I was using it now to make her look bad. I told her she was right about one thing. No one forced me. I chose to help because I believed we were aligned. I believed loyalty mattered. That belief no longer applied. Her expression hardened. She said if I walked away now, she would tell everyone what kind of person I really was. She said people would judge me. She said I would regret this. I told her she was free to say whatever she wanted. I was done responding to it. There was a pause, a short one. Then she said something quietly, something meant only for me. She said I would come back when things got hard. She said I always did. I met her eyes and told her this was the last time we would have this conversation. I got into my car and left them standing there. That evening, my cousin sent me another message. She said the family group chat had gone silent. No arguments, no accusations, just silence. I knew what that meant. The story my mother had been controlling for years was finally slipping out of her hands, and she had no idea what was coming next. The silence did not last. The next morning, messages started again, but they were different now. No one was attacking me directly. Instead, people asked careful questions. They wanted clarification. They wanted confirmation. They wanted reassurance that the situation was not as serious as it appeared. My mother was losing control of the narrative. By midday, my cousin called and told me something important. My mother had been asked to explain the numbers, not by one person, but by several. She had avoided it at first, then changed her story. She said I insisted on handling everything. She said I liked being needed. She said I exaggerated her condition to feel important. That version lasted less than an hour. One of my relatives contacted the insurance provider directly. Another asked for copies of receipts. My mother refused to share anything, claiming privacy. That refusal only raised more questions. Later that evening, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. It was short and formal. The sender introduced herself as a family friend who worked in healthcare administration. She asked if I could confirm whether I had been responsible for coordinating my mother's care. She said there were inconsistencies in what she was being told. I replied with a single sentence and attached the original documents. Nothing more. Within minutes, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother's number. I answered. Her voice was sharp but controlled. She asked why I was involving outsiders. She asked why I was trying to humiliate her. She said I was destroying her reputation. I told her I had not contacted anyone. I told her people were asking questions on their own. She went quiet for a moment, then she asked if I still had the video. I did not answer. She said she knew my cousin recorded it by accident. She said she never agreed to that. She said if the video surfaced publicly, there would be consequences. She said people could take legal action. I told her the video already existed. I told her that pretending otherwise would not change that. Her voice dropped. She said we could fix this privately. She said she would apologize. She said she would explain everything to the family. She said we could return to how things were. I told her that was no longer an option. She ended the call without another word. That night, my cousin sent me screenshots of messages I was never meant to see. Messages my mother had sent to others. In them, she was angry. She accused people of turning against her. She said I had planned this. She said I was manipulating everyone. I saved the screenshots. Before going to bed, I checked my email one last time. A new message had arrived from the insurance provider. It confirmed that my mother had attempted to reinstate my name on the account. The request had been denied. I read that line twice. For the first time, my mother had tried to reverse something and failed. And she knew exactly who had stopped her. The next move did not come from my mother. It came from the family. I received a message asking me to attend a small gathering the following evening. The wording was careful. It said people wanted clarity. It said misunderstandings had grown too large to ignore. It did not mention my mother directly, but I knew she would be there. I agreed to go. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. No one raised their voice. No one accused me openly. They waited. That silence told me everything. They expected me to explain myself. Before anyone spoke, my mother broke in. She said she was relieved I came. She said this situation had spiraled because of poor communication. She said she never intended to hurt me. She said she was exhausted and overwhelmed. She said stress made people say things they did not mean. I let her finish. Then I spoke. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue her emotions. I said I was stepping back from managing her care. I said this decision had already been implemented. I said I would not reverse it. I said the reasons were documented and shared. Someone asked about the video. My mother reacted instantly. She said it was taken out of context. She said it was recorded without consent. She said it should never have been shared. I asked her again directly if she denied what she said. She hesitated, just long enough for everyone to notice. Then she said the words were exaggerated. She said they were not meant seriously. She said I knew she loved me. That was when I took out my phone. I did not play the video. I did not need to. I told them it existed in full. I told them copies were saved. I told them the recording was unedited. I told them it matched exactly what had already been described. The room changed. Someone asked why I had never said anything before. I answered honestly. I said I believed things would improve. I said I thought loyalty mattered more than recognition. I said I was wrong. My mother interrupted again. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was turning family against her. She said I was punishing her for one mistake. I corrected her. I said this was not about one mistake. I said it was about years of dependence paired with public disrespect. I said I would not continue living inside that contradiction. There was silence after that. No one defended her immediately. She noticed. Her tone shifted. She said she was sick. She said she needed help. She said now was not the time for boundaries. I said boundaries were overdue. The meeting ended shortly after. No resolution was announced. No agreement was reached, but something important had changed. As I walked away, my cousin caught up to me. She told me quietly that my mother looked scared for the first time. Not angry, not offended, scared. Later that night, I received one final message from my mother. It was short. She asked if I really intended to let things fall apart like this. I read it once and did not reply. Because things were not falling apart. They were finally being exposed. The shift became visible the next day. People who had stayed silent before began asking my mother practical questions, not emotional ones, not comforting ones. They asked who was paying for what now. They asked which appointments were scheduled. They asked what the insurance changes actually meant. These were questions she was not prepared to answer. She avoided them at first. She said things were being handled. She said she was managing. She said I was still involved behind the scenes. That claim lasted until the first bill arrived. By afternoon, my cousin called me again. She said my mother was furious. She said the coverage changes were real and immediate. She said several appointments had been canceled, not by me, but by offices that required updated authorization. She said my mother was telling people I had sabotaged her on purpose. I told my cousin nothing had been sabotaged. I told her the system was simply functioning without me. That evening, I received another call from an unknown number. I answered. It was a representative from a specialist's office. She asked if I could confirm payment responsibility for an upcoming procedure. I told her I was no longer involved. She thanked me and ended the call politely. Minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. Her voice was no longer controlled. She accused me of deliberately timing everything to humiliate her. She said I had waited until people were watching. She said I enjoyed this. I told her she was wrong. I told her I had waited because I hoped it would never come to this. She asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted distance. She laughed, but there was panic underneath it. She said I could not just disappear. She said family did not work that way. She said I would regret turning my back when she needed me most. I told her I had already turned my life around, not my back. She went quiet again. Then she said something that confirmed everything. She said she never thought I would actually leave. She said she assumed I would calm down and fix things like I always did. That sentence ended the conversation. I hung up and blocked her number. The next morning, messages from relatives slowed. Not because they stopped caring, but because they had started seeing the situation clearly. Some asked me privately if I was okay. Some said they had no idea how much I had been handling. A few apologized for believing the wrong version of the story. My mother, meanwhile, had stopped responding to questions. Late that night, my cousin sent me one final update. She said my mother was talking about legal options. She said she believed the video had ruined everything. She said she was trying to find a way to regain control. I saved the message and turned my phone off. Because if my mother believed the video was the problem, she still did not understand what she had already lost. The legal threat did not come directly. It arrived quietly through a third party. I received an email from a law office 2 days later. The subject line referenced a potential privacy violation. The message stated they were representing my mother and requested confirmation regarding possession of a recording made without consent. The tone was formal but vague, as if they were testing how far they could go. I did not reply immediately. Instead, I forwarded the email to my cousin. She responded within minutes, telling me my mother had contacted several lawyers already and had been turned away more than once. No one wanted to touch the situation without knowing the full context. That mattered. I replied to the email with one sentence. I stated that I had not distributed any material publicly and that any further communication should be directed in writing. Nothing else. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a message from a relative who had avoided taking sides until now. She asked me directly whether I planned to release the video. I told her no. I told her the video existed only as proof, not leverage. She thanked me and added something that surprised me. She said people were starting to realize the issue was not the recording. It was the dependence. It was the years of silence. It was the assumption that I would always absorb everything quietly. That same evening, I received another call from a medical office, this one asking if I could provide historical information because my mother could not answer certain questions. I declined again. The office noted it politely and said they would follow up with her directly. The pattern was clear now. Every system that once relied on me was adjusting to my absence, and none of them were collapsing. They were simply moving on without me. Late that night, my cousin sent me another message. She said my mother was telling people she felt betrayed, not because I left, but because I left without permission. She said my mother believed authority had been taken from her, not responsibility. I did not respond to that message. Instead, I opened my calendar and marked the start date of the program I had confirmed days earlier. Seeing it written there made it real. This was no longer preparation. This was transition. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No calls, no messages, no demands. It lasted only a few hours, but it was enough to understand something important. My mother had finally run out of immediate options. And when control fails, desperation usually follows. The desperation showed itself the next day. I was at home when my cousin called, her voice low and urgent. She told me my mother had collapsed at a relative's house earlier that morning. Paramedics were called. She was taken to the hospital for observation. No details yet, only that she was asking for me by name. I listened without interrupting. My cousin waited, expecting me to react the way I always had. Panic, immediate action, reversal. I asked one question instead. I asked if the doctors had confirmed anything serious. She said no. She said they were running tests. She said it might be related to medication changes or stress. I told her I would come later, after I finished what I was doing. When I arrived at the hospital hours later, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. My mother was sitting upright in the bed, alert, her expression sharp when she saw me. The moment I stepped inside, she started speaking. She said I took too long. She said this never would have happened if I had stayed involved. She said the doctors were confused because no one knew her history the way I did. She said I had put her life at risk. I did not argue. I asked the doctor what the issue was. He explained calmly that there had been no collapse, only dizziness and elevated stress. He said her vitals were stable. He said adjustments would be made. When he left, my mother turned back to me. Her tone changed. She said this scare should show me how serious things were. She said this was proof she still needed me. She said it was time to end the conflict. I told her I was glad she was stable. She waited for more. I did not give it. She asked if I would take over again, just temporarily, just until things settled. I told her no. Her face changed instantly. She said I was heartless. She said I was punishing a sick person. She said people would hear about this. I told her people already had. She went silent. As I turned to leave, she said one last thing. She said I would regret choosing independence over family. She said I would come back when things fell apart. I stopped at the door and looked at her once more. I told her I had already lived through things falling apart. I told her I was done rebuilding them alone. That night, my cousin messaged me again. She said the family was shaken. She said some people finally understood what had been happening. She said my mother's story was no longer convincing. I turned my phone off and went to sleep. The scare had failed. And now my mother had used her strongest card and lost. The days after the hospital incident were quiet on the surface, but underneath, everything was shifting. My mother stopped calling me, not because she accepted the situation, but because she was recalculating. I had seen that pattern before. Silence was never surrender, it was strategy. I learned through my cousin that my mother had moved in with another relative temporarily. She told people it was only until things stabilized. She said she needed time to recover. She said the stress I caused had affected her health. What she did not say was that she no longer had control over her own arrangements. That same week, I received an unexpected email. It was from an organization I had not interacted with in years. They were confirming my enrollment and requesting final documents. The deadline was approaching fast. I completed the paperwork that night and submitted everything without hesitation. The next morning, my cousin sent me a message that changed the tone of everything. She told me a clip from the dinner video had resurfaced in a private family chat. Not shared by me, shared by someone else who had grown tired of the lies. The reaction was immediate. People confronted my mother directly, not emotionally, but practically. They asked her why she spoke that way. They asked her how long I had been paying for things. They asked why she never corrected the record. My mother denied some parts, minimized others, claimed exhaustion, claimed stress, claimed misunderstanding. But the video did not argue back, it did not explain, it simply existed. By the end of that day, several relatives stopped responding to her messages altogether. That evening, I received a call from someone I had not expected, a distant relative who had always been neutral. She told me quietly that my mother had finally admitted I had been paying for most of her care. She said my mother sounded angry, not ashamed. She said that frightened her. I thanked her and ended the call. Later that night, my cousin sent one final update. She said my mother had asked whether I planned to expose everything publicly. She said my mother believed I was waiting for the right moment. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I told my cousin the truth. I told her I did not need to expose anything. The truth was already moving on its own. Because once control is lost, even silence becomes evidence. And my mother had never learned how to survive without control. The call came late at night, from a number I almost ignored. It was a relative I rarely spoke to, someone practical and usually distant from conflict. She did not ask how I was. She asked if I knew my mother had contacted a lawyer again that afternoon. She said this time it was not about the video. It was about me. According to her, my mother was claiming financial manipulation. She said I pressured her into giving me control. She said I made decisions without consent. She said I benefited from the arrangement. The story was shifting into something more dangerous. I thanked her for telling me and hung up. Within minutes, my cousin confirmed it. She said my mother was telling people I had mismanaged funds. She said my mother believed this version would force me to come back and defend myself. She said my mother was confident I would not allow my name to be questioned publicly. She was right about one thing: I would not allow it. I opened my files and reviewed everything again. Dates, transfers, authorizations, emails, every decision documented, every payment traceable. There was no gap, no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The next morning, I received another email from the law office. This one asked for clarification regarding financial authority. The wording was more specific now, more aggressive. I replied with attachments. Not explanations, not arguments, just proof. Less than an hour later, the email chain went silent. That afternoon, my cousin called me, her voice tense. She said my mother was furious. She said the lawyer had dropped the case immediately. She said my mother accused someone of betraying her by telling the truth too early. By evening, a new problem emerged. A relative contacted me directly and asked if I planned to cut everyone off. The question was careful, but the fear behind it was clear. They were worried I would disappear completely, that I would leave the family fractured. I told them I was not cutting anyone off. I was just no longer carrying what was never meant to be mine alone. That night, I received a message from my mother. It was the first since the hospital. She said we needed to talk before things went too far. She said misunderstandings were becoming dangerous. She said people were turning against her unfairly. She said I had enough power now and should use it responsibly. I read the message twice. Then I archived it. Because she still believed this was about power. And she was about to find out what happens when there is nothing left to threaten. The final attempt came quietly, without warnings or accusations. I found out through my cousin that my mother had requested a family meeting again, but this time without me present. She told people she wanted to clear misunderstandings and calm things down. She said too much damage had already been done. She said she was ready to move forward. That phrasing alone told me everything. According to my cousin, the meeting did not go as planned. People asked questions she could not redirect. They asked why she never corrected the family when she spoke badly about me. They asked why she accepted years of support without acknowledging it. They asked why she tried legal pressure instead of conversation. She answered selectively. She blamed stress. She blamed illness. She blamed fear of losing control. At one point, she said she never believed I would actually leave. She said she assumed I would always come back once emotions settled. That sentence changed the room. Later that night, my cousin called me again. She said something unexpected happened after the meeting ended. My mother had asked privately whether I would reconsider if she apologized publicly. Not privately, publicly. I did not answer immediately. I thought about the years I had waited for quiet recognition. The nights spent fixing problems no one else wanted to handle. The way appreciation had always been conditional, never freely given. I told my cousin no. Not because an apology would be meaningless, but because it would be performative. Another attempt to regain control of the story. The next morning, my mother sent a final message. It was calm, almost professional. She said she was willing to admit mistakes. She said families survive conflict by compromise. She said I had made my point and should step back into my role. I read the message once. Then I replied with a single sentence. I told her I had already stepped into my own life and would not be returning to the old one. She did not respond. Hours passed, then a day, then another. The silence this time was different. It was not strategic, it was resignation. Through my cousin, I learned my mother had stopped trying to explain herself. She stopped calling people. She stopped pushing new stories. She focused instead on adjusting to the reality she could no longer undo. I did not feel relief, I felt finality. The line had been drawn, crossed, and sealed. And there was nothing left for either of us to say. The change showed itself in small, undeniable ways. People stopped asking me to fix things. No one forwarded messages meant for my mother anymore. No one expected updates. The family adjusted quietly, the way systems do when a central piece is removed and nothing collapses the way everyone feared. I learned through my cousin that my mother had started handling things herself. Not well, but directly. She attended appointments with relatives instead of me. She made phone calls she once avoided. She waited on hold. She argued with offices. She missed deadlines. She complained about how complicated everything was. No one rushed to replace me. That absence mattered more than any confrontation. A week later, a relative reached out to me privately. She told me something I was not meant to hear. She said my mother had admitted she underestimated how much I did. Not publicly, not formally. Quietly, and only when she believed it no longer mattered. I did not respond to that message. The acknowledgement came too late to change anything. Around the same time, something else happened. I received confirmation for the next stage of my program. Orientation dates, requirements, deadlines, clear expectations, no emotional ambiguity, just progress. The contrast was sharp. My cousin told me my mother noticed it too. She had seen updates. She had heard conversations. She knew I was moving forward without hesitation. That knowledge unsettled her more than the loss of control ever did. One evening, my cousin called me with a warning. She said my mother had asked whether I still had the video. She said my mother believed I was holding it as leverage, waiting for the right moment to use it. I told my cousin the truth. I told her I had not watched the video again. I told her I did not need to, because the evidence had already done its job. A few days later, a message arrived from my mother's number. It was not an apology. It was not an accusation. It was a statement. She said she hoped I was satisfied with how things turned out. I did not reply. Satisfaction had never been the goal. Distance was. And by then, it was complete. The calm did not mean resolution. It meant the last consequences were arriving quietly, without drama. I found out through my cousin that my mother's temporary living arrangement had ended. The relative she stayed with could no longer manage the constant appointments, the phone calls, the frustration. There were no arguments, just a clear boundary. My mother had to find another solution. She tried reaching out again, not to me directly, but through others. She asked whether anyone thought I might help if she asked properly this time. The responses were cautious. No one promised anything. No one volunteered on my behalf. That was new. A few days later, I received a message from a medical office addressed to both of us by mistake. It was a reminder about outstanding paperwork. I forwarded it to the office with a short note stating I was no longer the contact person. The reply came quickly, acknowledging the correction. That exchange ended the last administrative tie. My cousin later told me my mother was angry about it, not because of the paperwork, but because it confirmed something she had been refusing to accept. The systems no longer recognized me as responsible. Not legally, not practically, not symbolically. Around the same time, rumors started fading. The dramatic versions of the story lost momentum. People stopped speculating. They moved on to other topics, other problems, other lives. That mattered. I noticed it when someone mentioned my name without tension. No whispers, no qualifiers, just my name attached to my own plans. One evening, my cousin called again. She said my mother had finally watched the full video herself, not the part people discussed. The entire recording. She said my mother was silent afterward. She said she did not defend herself. She did not explain. She simply ended the conversation and went to bed. I did not know what that meant. I did not need to. The next morning, I woke up to a message from my program confirming final enrollment. All documents accepted. Everything complete. No conditions left. I closed the message and sat still for a moment. Because the life I had paused years ago was no longer waiting for me. It was already moving forward. The shift became permanent when routine replaced conflict. Days passed without updates from my cousin, which told me more than any message ever could. There were no new arguments, no fresh accusations, no sudden emergencies. My mother was no longer trying to pull attention back to herself. She was busy managing what she could no longer avoid. I learned later that she had missed an appointment because she filled out the wrong form. Another was delayed because paperwork was incomplete. None of it was dramatic. None of it was urgent enough to force intervention. It was simply inconvenient, repetitive, and exhausting. The kind of work I used to do quietly. At the same time, my own schedule filled in fast. Orientation materials arrived. Requirements stacked up. Deadlines were firm and impersonal. There was no room for negotiation. Either I showed up prepared or I did not move forward. I showed up prepared. One evening, I received a short message from a relative who had not spoken to me in months. She said she wanted to check in. She said she hoped I was doing well. She did not mention my mother. She did not ask questions. She did not hint at reconciliation. That told me everything had settled. A few days later, my cousin called with one final update. She said my mother had stopped talking about me entirely. No complaints. No warnings. No predictions about regret. She said it was as if I had been removed from the script my mother used to narrate her life. I asked how she sounded. My cousin paused before answering. She said tired, not angry, not defeated, just tired. That night I checked my files one last time. The records were complete. The video was untouched. The evidence remained exactly where it had been placed. I did not feel the need to revisit any of it. The next morning, I left early for my first required session. I did not look at my phone on the way. I did not wait for interruptions. When I returned home later that day, there were no messages waiting, no missed calls, no demands. For the first time in years, nothing followed me. And that was when I understood the real consequence had already arrived. Not for me. For the person who finally realized control only works when someone agrees to carry it. The last move came when I was no longer expecting one. I found out through a short message from my cousin. She said my mother had told someone she wanted to speak to me one final time, not to argue, not to explain. She said it was important and that it would bring closure for both of us. She said she would respect whatever decision I made afterward. The wording was careful, too careful. I did not respond immediately. Later that evening, my phone rang from a blocked number. I answered without speaking. My mother's voice came through, calm and measured. She said she did not want to fight anymore. She said everything had gone too far. She said she understood now that I needed independence. She said she only wanted to talk as a mother, not about money or responsibility. I let her speak. She said she had been thinking a lot. She said she never realized how much pressure I was under. She said she assumed I was strong enough to handle it. She said that assumption was a mistake. Then she paused. She said if I ever decided to help again, even in a small way, she would be grateful. She said she would never take it for granted again. She said things could be different this time. I understood then why she had called. This was not closure, it was negotiation. I told her I was glad she was reflecting. I told her I hoped things improved for her. I told her I was not coming back into that role in any form. There was silence on the line, then her voice changed just slightly. She asked if that was really final. She asked if there was nothing she could say. I told her there was nothing left to discuss. She ended the call without saying goodbye. The next day, my cousin called me, shaken. She said my mother was telling people she had tried everything. She said my mother told them she had accepted reality now. She said my mother believed this was the end of the situation. This time, she was right. That evening, I deleted the blocked number history, not out of anger, out of certainty. The final attempt had been made. And it had failed without a fight. The end did not arrive with an apology, a confrontation, or a dramatic announcement. It arrived quietly, the way irreversible things usually do. Weeks passed without contact, no messages through relatives, no indirect questions. No emergencies designed to pull me back. My cousin eventually confirmed what I had already sensed. My mother had stopped asking about me, not because she understood, but because there was nothing left to leverage. The systems had adjusted, the family had adjusted, and so had she. I learned later that she had reorganized her care entirely. Different contacts, different routines, no central person managing everything. The process was slower, less efficient, and far more frustrating. But it was hers. For the first time, it always had been. One afternoon, I received a message from my cousin with no context. She told me my mother had said my name during a conversation, then stopped herself and changed the subject. No accusation followed. No complaint, just silence. That moment mattered more than anything else. It meant the story she used to tell about me no longer served a purpose. I did not feel victory. I did not feel regret. What I felt was distance, clean and uninterrupted, the kind that does not need reinforcement. I checked my files one last time and closed them. The documents stayed archived. The video remained untouched. Nothing needed to be proven anymore. The next morning, I stepped fully into the life I had delayed for years. There were schedules to follow, expectations to meet, responsibilities that belonged only to me. No one waited for me to fix something unrelated. No one assumed I would absorb the consequences of their choices. The absence of that weight was unmistakable. Through my cousin, I heard one final update months later. My mother had told someone she never thought things would end this way, not with anger. Not with reconciliation, just with distance. She was right. Because distance does not argue, it does not explain, it simply remains. And that was how the story ended. Not with forgiveness or punishment, but with separation so complete that there was nothing left to contest. You have reached the end of the text.